Díaghuiomh go léir cóide agus tá fáilte rót. Welcome to my story with me, Mary Honan, and my very special guest. I haven't done this show for quite a while now. Life gets in the way, but I'm honoured that my very first guest back is the very well-known Linda Scotson from the UK. And Linda has a remarkable story. She's because of her son Doran's um, cerebral palsy at birth. Linda found a method of helping children and adults all over the world, and for many, many years in breathing techniques, and it has had profound effects. And she's a best-selling author, and she's just one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Hello, Linda. How are you?
Hello, hello, lovely person.
Tell me, Linda, bring us back to the very beginning, when and your story from the very beginning, how you got involved in the Linda Scotson
Oh,
therapy.
yeah, how Doran's life directed me there. So I was an artist, a painter.
Yes.
I taught in art schools. I was fortunate to be able to earn a living through my art. I had a partner who, and we decided we'd go and live in a small cottage in the country, which was accessible to London, but it was considered to most people to be out in the wild. And we had a daughter. And then sadly, my partner died, and I was looking for ways to continue to earn a living. I was pregnant. I was carrying his child, whom I'd already decided to call Doran, which is an Irish name, a Celtic name meaning stranger. And there seemed to be something already magical about this child. But I was so impressed and humbled with my daughter and her wisdom, which seemed to exist even before she was born. I used to talk to her when I was driving the car, and I often thought, oh, if we were stopped at the traffic lights, they'd look at this woman talking to herself. But of course, I was talking to Lily, and presumably she could.
Lily is your daughter. Your daughter. Yeah, she's only 2 years older than Doran.
Yes. So and it was an idyllic year that we had, and now I look to a way to earn a living from home, and I was able to restore antique lacquered furniture because I could paint on it. I learned the mysteries of how to antique the furniture down so it looked as old as it did when it arrived in me via the bits that had fallen off. And so there was Lily and I, and there was my other child I didn't know. Doran can be a girl's or a boy's name, so
yes,
it doesn't matter. And we were looking forward to the birth of our friend, and all was intended to go well. My friends were very, very supportive around me. I lived.
Sorry for interrupting you. From your book, you've had amazing support all the way through. Yeah, not everybody is fortunate to have had the friends support, if you like, that you had. Do you know? And I do think it takes a village to raise a child. And in the case of, if you look at your book, the other child, the exceptional siblings of special needs children by Linda Scotson, where you talked about the impact of Lily on Doran's life, and also the impact of Doran on Lily's life. But the impact of the entire community that you had around you, your friends, your family, your parents, Lily, it combined, you were all able to take the shock, I suppose, of the diagnosis and to go with it, if you like.
So, well, it was because we didn't go with the prognosis. We went with the diagnosis, but not prognosis.
Prognosis.
And the fact that was that what I was told would inevitably happen to Doran, what would happen to his body if I kept him, because he was considered to be so irretrievably brain injured, that I wouldn't be able to support my daughter if I was caring for him. But to just track back a little bit, I lived between two villages, and it was a little back in history where the villages still had a lot of community life. And you didn't feel that you couldn't ask someone for help, and it would be your heart would immediately want to help somebody else if you had a problem in the area. So and one of the villages, Forest Row, has a big Rudolf Steiner school and art college and biodynamic farming. This is a philosophy of life that celebrates childhood, celebrates creativity, celebrates the right side of the brain, if you like.
They take the focus of academic education and place it more on nature and on the child learning at their own speed.
Yes, I think at information, that the child having a foundation from its own experience, rather than having something imposed rigorously on you, before you have a chance to be able to weigh up, is this really something that I would find acceptable, or do I see that there are other ways of looking at this? So that's really the critical thinking. It's feeling, thought, form. You come from the feeling. If the feeling is underestimated, and here again, which runs through the book, the wisdom of the child, the spontaneous wisdom of children, and the huge amount of love, as well as a sense of fair play that is within children. And
I was profoundly, I told you that when I was speaking to you the other day, profoundly impacted by the book, by this particular book, The Other Child, The Exceptional Siblings of Special Needs Children, because I know from my own family, there's disabilities in the family, and there's always the other child that almost, you say, oh, he's great and he's doing fantastic and he's great with his brother and blah blah blah, and you sometimes could easily forget the other child, that the other child is suffering silently and saying nothing really, and just because they want to please both the mother and they want because they love their brother, so it was a profoundly impactful book for somebody that considers themselves pretty hard when it comes to reading about trauma. I found myself crying during reading the book, and I suppose it's an example really to you of how beautifully it was written as well, not just the content but the way it was written. Every bit of you was in that book, Linda, every bit of you.
So in Lily, there was a poetry which I also saw in other children, and a vibrance, and without her help and assistance, the joy that I needed to create around Doran's birth would have been much more tricky to produce.
So bring me back to when you were told that there was a problem with Doran, an issue with his development.
Doran was a home birth. I had my friends with me and Lily, and the weather was warm, and the sky was blue, and the moment of his birth seemed so good. But I noticed that his color wasn't quite right. It seemed yellowish to me. It just didn't, and he seemed too alert. His eyes were flashing backwards and forwards. He seemed as if he was expecting something. I mean, actually, he was fighting for his life, but I didn't know. He breastfed, but there seemed to be an anxiety even about this. Something as if he was doing it to keep alive, but this was not really his priority. Whereas for a newborn baby, this is your priority. You can smell the milk, you go for it. You're bonded with this wonderful supportive environment who is your mother. Now you're the other side, and you are twins together. But for Doran, there was something else going on, and nobody around me seemed to want to support my anxiety. They couldn't understand why I had it. Wonderful, you've got a son. You've had, and it was a natural childbirth. I didn't need any painkillers at all of any kind.
Mother's tuition.
And yet, I was concerned. And finally, I felt he was becoming more and more tense and inward, and his body was starting to shake. And at this point, I had phoned the midwife and the doctors, and they had not been that concerned. They still thought I was an over anxious parent. But suddenly, I got a locum, and the locum knew the particular signs, which are very unusual, perhaps because it was a blood incompatibility. This was a blood incompatibility. So,
and it was when you had a blood test, she suggested.
Only when I got to the hospital, yes. This particular group of antibodies weren't then tested for. So it appeared that like his father, it was A positive, no problem at all. So you have, again, it was the example of looking a bit deeper. Here are the symptoms. There must be, and the locum must have had some other experience of this. But very quickly, I drove chaotically through, through the very windy roads to the hospital. My companion, my old school friend Catherine, in the back of the car, holding Doran in one arm and other arm around Lily, thought we were all going to heaven, and so it really wasn't worrying about anything else. She only told me after.
Pure panic.
So we arrived. He immediately had 2 exchange transfusions. I stayed in the hospital. Lily went to stay with some friends who lived quite near, and I waited. And then I was told he had survived the transfusions, and I was to go down and hear what the result was. And as I went into the lift going down, I knew I would never be the same.
Yeah, that was profound in the book. When I saw that, as I stepped into the lift, I knew nothing was going to be the same again when I stepped out.
And it was also as if an angel was with me in the lift. And somehow also his father, because I had learned a lot from a deeper understanding of his passing, and because
he took his own. It's safe to say he took his own life just shortly before Doran was born.
It was very complicated for him. Very complicated for him, but the feeling of his presence was very strong and very supportive. And I have never felt quite at home in the world. I always felt that somehow or another everything here was for a conspiring number of purposes which were lifting love upwards, like so many tent poles lifting a tent, and so we have to accept the journey. But I thought, wow, this is going to be some journey. And so
Linda, I think I asked you the other day, when you look at what you've come through, do you think that you've been able to come out the other side of it? A lot to do with you being such a creative person, being such an artistic person that you see things in 3D, you see things completed before they're finished. Some people have to do something, see it finished, and then they say, "Oh, I understand that." Whereas your journey, you were able to
Yes, that's so correct. Yes,
materialize things
yes,
in your head,
I saw that and then move towards it.
move
Uh,
towards it.
and I I remember thinking also, used to have films that you would see some part of the story, a salient part, and then the screen would go misty, and it would be 3 years later, 10 years later. And so
You
I
wanted
saw
that.
it 10 years later, and now I thought, now I have to move to get to that point. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
They told you anyway, the diagnosis was that it was a form of cerebral palsy,
yes, yes,
and that Doran would be very, very, very limited in anything that he would do
yes.
in life.
Hmm. He was likely to be profoundly deaf. There was a question mark over his vision. His eyes were turned inwards, so the pupils were like little half moons over his nose. I was told that he wouldn't be able to sit or probably communicate at all. So, what life was there? And I kept thinking, well, the spirit is there. I understand. I've talked to him. I feel still that we can communicate. Of course, he actually did have a very strong sense of smell. That was, and that I think helped him when I had declined politely their offer to put
Put
him
him
into care. And that was odd because I felt they absolutely have no idea what's going on within me. They have no idea
yeah.
of what this feeling, which is love, which is extremely protective, but it's also analytical on his behalf, because it needed to be fairly quick thinking as well. And had been given this journey, and and Lily had been given a brother. So I knew that when you boil things down, uh, science is very limited. The main questions they cannot answer. And people are constantly getting ill, mentally and physically. We don't know the official origins of life. There's a lot of controversy over that. We can't, through science, explain the human spirit because we've made science in an artificial way.
Do you think that scientists, because they think analytically and because they think mathematically, if you like, and people like you or I are very much think of people, I suppose, in the whole, and think of everything as being interconnected or creatively, that helped you to actually see that, okay, they're telling me that Doran has a brain injury, but there's if I sort out maybe his diaphragm, that this is going to rejuvenate his brain injury in some way, that you were able to actually see beyond the linear look that the scientists take of things, and see Doran as a whole person, and find out if I do A to Doran, it'll affect B and C and D, that
Yeah.
scientists don't think about. They tend to treat the brain, treat the heart, treat the lungs, treat the stomach, but not the whole person.
Well,
There's not the holistic approach.
it's more, life is more like a symphony. All of these notes are so important. All of these instruments are so important. So these intervening variables they have to exclude from their studies to get a pure, clean study. But gives you a rationale for a particular way of doing things. And there's a convenient place for that. But if you really want to go and push beyond, before you maybe do the next set of these studies. Otherwise, the studies become a barrier if you insist that the only reality is the result that you're getting through the study. And this wasn't the origin of science at all, not during the Renaissance. That there was no separation. You have, and most of the brilliant scientists that you read about, they develop the idea of the direction which they wish to travel, which is comparable to what you were saying, through an inspiration, a vision, all kinds of other aspects of the creative process. And then they went to investigate. So in a way, that's what I ultimately was able to do, because in order to do this, it was very useful for me to have all this data. But then I began to put it together like a painting or a piece of music, and it all interlocked very beautifully. And I also understood that the interlocking of these bits of scientific research and observations, the human body is a dynamic, and it's not locked into its physical boundaries. It's relating always to the environment. And what is called epigenesis, that is what triggers the information in the cell, is something from the outside. And it's a number of different things. If you're looking at being stimulated by something, you need that stimulation, and then you react to it, and the reaction creates a stretch, which creates a change in breathing, which creates a change in circulation. So you might say, well, the trigger is that you needed to be aroused, but what was the chain of reaction from that arousal that actually did the trick? And then when you understand that, then you can begin to introduce it, even though some of the factors in the earlier part of the chain are not yet possible. So that's kind of, but to get back, if I can just back to me when I got back, very first thing, I definitely wasn't a scientist at that time, although I read huge numbers of scientific journals. I just wanted always to find out what was as much information about this world in which I lived as possible. But my instinct was that Doran had been inside me for 9 months, and there had been a loving environment in which he was comforted and supported by my breath, by the movements of my body, by my heartbeat, and suppose he was just heavily traumatized by what happened to him, because he'd been very much poisoned by this blood incompatibility. So his whole body had been trying to cleanse itself, and that hadn't been successful from the point of view of the levels of toxicity in his brain. But it was a dynamic, growing brain, and I at least knew that the brain wasn't simply a closed shop. It was dependent on oxygen, which was dependent on blood flow, which was dependent on breathing. That is obvious to me. So anyway, I was told, all right, you take him home. First of all, I was told to give him phenobarbital, which would sedate him, which I refused, because I want him to be aware with what awareness he has. Then I was told, keep him in his cot, don't pick him up. Well, as soon as I put him down, he screamed, which I thought was extremely intelligent, because in his position, I would have screamed. Well, why would I want to be suddenly left abandoned when I had gone through all this suffering? Surely you want to pick someone up anyway to comfort them upon you. But also, once he was on my body, he was getting information again from me, my smell, my milk, because he breastfed. Just to track back a little bit, I'd been told I couldn't do this. It was impossible. He was having phototherapy. He was certainly not a child that one could in any way possibly recommend this attempt.
The arrogance of the medical profession, I'm sorry, but that they would try to deny a mother's instinct.
Yes, yes, yes. And of course, when you're breastfeeding a child, your love pours out. It's such a wonderful exchange. So I said, look, I've got all this milk. You're short of milk for your preemie babies. I'll give you the milk. You give me Doran. All right, they needed it so much, and I had an abundance, which was interesting. Despite all the stress that we'd been under, there was an abundance of milk there. And so, with a little bold jigging about between Doran and I, and because I think he had this lovely sense of smell, and he remembered me and the milk, he latched on. And then, how is this happening? We have these other babies which are, only premature. They don't have anything like the degree of the problem that your baby has. They can't breastfeed. So did you ever allow the mothers to try? Well, no, they didn't. They didn't. And there is something that it's called kangaroo care, which was developed, I think, in New Zealand, which ought to be at least commonplace in hospitals, where you put your baby on your bare chest and opportunity, carry it around with you. I didn't know about this. Nobody recommended it. It only turned up when I was doing research at the university, and fascinated me that the things that mothers do instinctively. And running the charity which I run, and working with parents whose children come to me because of the levels of brain injury that they have. And time and again, a mother had said to me, he had this really awful prognosis, but and he cried, so I carried him. I said, you carried him? He said, and then a few weeks later, he didn't seem as bad. He didn't seem to correspond to the diagnosis. So this is such a simple thing. So, however, not long after that, Doran had kidney failure and was on dialysis at Guy's Hospital. And again, I only rescued him at the last moment. The doctor who came to me told me he just had gastroenteritis, and he would get better. And I thought, well, gastroenteritis doesn't sound that good. I know it's lethal in budgerigars. I'm not sure about
humans.
So he was, I mean, I think had been yellow before. This is after a month when he had been doing so well, and Lily and I had been doing everything together, and I've been dancing all night with him, and I had the energy I needed. So I had the wit to phone up again. I got another locum. It could have been the same one. Anyway, this guy had in the past seen a child with kidney failure, with the uremic syndrome. And so very quickly, they sent an ambulance, and we were rushed down, the three of us, to the hospital in Brighton, and then to Guy's Hospital, where he was put on dialysis.
You had good experiences in Guy's Hospital.
The Guy's Hospital was wonderful. It was just before really they closed down the kidney ward. They had very little money. The money was running out all the time. But the kidney ward, the sort of volunteer workers in the kidney ward were largely the children. They were carrying the bedpans around and delivering messages. They were wonderful. They were wonderful. And the doctors were so good. They just went, down on their knees to the children, and Lily had a cold, and she had a cough, and they said, we're not supposed, we can put you up, but we can't put your daughter up. But it seems awful. I think we can find a solution. So we'll mark her down as pneumonia and give her a bed. So
they wouldn't do that. You need to try to get a bed in hospital now.
So she had sacks of toys, and then they said to me, you can just breathe between the two. And it was so lovely, because they sort of understood that what I didn't want was sort of
Be separated.
having fear or separation. None of this. I felt somehow that this connection between us was going to be sustained, and we were on a journey, and this was the beginning of the journey, and of this journey. The journey wasn't suddenly going to be switched. So after a month in which I was acting as the auxiliary nurse, I don't know what they would have done without me, because the poor nurse was on duty for 12 hours, got no sleep or anything. She said, I would sometimes say to her, well, look, you sit down and I'll do it. But she said, if I sit down, I won't get up again, because they were so short of nurses, but ever so dedicated, ever so lovely.
Yeah.
And finally, after this month, and there were many other things happening too, because Lily, eventually, as she got better, I had some good friends in London, a writer and his family, who were absolutely lovely, and they said they'd take Lily. So I would, in the end, as Doran was getting better, I went back and stayed the night, and then we came in to the hospital in the morning for Doran, and there was a blizzard. Another friend of mine, because don't forget I'd been an artist in London, so I was suddenly in London, so I was accessible to people. Oh, you know, Linda's in a bit of a fix, we'll come and help her. And it was so lovely. So a good friend of mine used to come to the house, and he equipped Lily with a nice padded suit to cope with the cold, and he would carry her, and we were slipping and sliding. I mean, the traffic was brought to a standstill. It was a really serious blizzard that year, which I think went down in meteorological history in London. And it was just so wonderful that on Christmas Eve, he came off the dialysis, he breastfeed again. I had him and Lily, and there we were sitting in the ward, and I was so delighted because he seemed better neurologically. I knew he could see, his eyes seemed different, and it was, I'd been very close to him all this time, so he'd never lost the feeling that I wasn't there. I think also people forget that the olfactory sense is very strong, and very strong in infants, and that easily allows the infant to identify its mother.
Yeah.
But also the familiarity as you get near, the heartbeat, the breathing pattern, everything, you know. So somehow or another, there had been a positive shift in Doran.
Yeah, you could see that.
And his medical notes had been lost, by the way. So,
I'm not surprised.
They knew, they hadn't followed him. So they knew about the problem with his kidneys, but they didn't know about the brain injury. And I didn't tell them. So the registrar, a young woman, came across to me. This was on Christmas morning, and I was feeling really happy because I felt we had come through the first stage, the first lesson. We were through. We'd come through our first lesson. We were, and she saw me breastfeeding, and she said, "You know, I know you're very happy, but I feel I do have to tell you, your baby's very seriously brain injured."
Brain injured.
It's a funny thing to say to a mother who's just happily feeding a baby who just come through. But it was her innocence. She was trying to help me because they have this real dark feeling about a brain injury. And I, of course, knew he was seriously brain injured, but I knew he was better. So it actually seemed slightly quaintly funny to me. It didn't hurt me. I was just thought, that's just not the best thing that you should be saying to somebody in my position. But it also, of course, showed me that they had absolutely no idea of Doran's history. And when I did see the consultants, they were more positive about Doran because they hadn't got his history. They were just going upon how he manifested. So we had a hospital car to go home, all the way to East Grinstead, and outside East Grinstead, the roads were impassable.
Can I interrupt you there? I'm just thinking, they were thinking again, as I said earlier, as a scientist, linearly, he was jaundiced, he's brain damaged, he's going to have A, B, C, D, and E. What uh, they weren't factoring in the human spirit, and they weren't factoring in a mother's love, and the combination of the mother's love and the human spirit between the child and the connection between both. So again, it comes back to this holistic view.
Yes.
How a person can improve. A normal functioning brained child, if you like, can seriously deteriorate when they're not given human contact.
Yes,
And we've seen
yes,
that
and we do in orphanages. This is what
orphanages in Romania or wherever,
happens.
Russia. We've
Not a
seen
study
that.
this,
We've
mm,
seen that. So
mm.
why can't the reverse happen if the child is loaded with love and attention and stimulation?
Yeah, and it's also why nursing is so important. By loving nursing is so important. If you discount that, and once upon a time, nurses were very much accepted as doing a lot of the healing because they were allowing the patient to heal themselves after an operation, because of the warmth and support that they were getting. But if a nurse is trained and it's only mechanical, then and we haven't got time to introduce this as actually a very important component of the healing process, then it's very sad because you're removing from the hospital care something that is essential really to the being who has been hurt, who now needs a deep level of healing, and to want to be healed, to want to be alive, to want to be valued, because it's the loving, humorous value that nursing can give. It makes you laugh, you feel valued, you develop a strength. Life seems worth living again, and the empathy. And a lot of people came and talked to me, including the nurses who had a lot of suffering in their backgrounds. And they said, well, I've never been able to talk to anybody else in this way before, but here are you. Obviously, your track record has not been a very easy one by conventional standards, and yet you're smiling. So we want to know why.
How did you keep so positive, Linda, throughout all of it? How did you feel so certain? Was it just instinctual? Was it just, I keep saying a mother's instinct? Was it just an animal instinct in you that knew that your son was there, and your son was not presenting to you the way he was presenting, or the way he was dismissed by the medical profession, and that there was that there was a boy and now a man there screaming to come out?
Yes,
What was it about you?
so you're right. I mean, when people said, don't have to worry, he's just a baby, and I said, I'm not holding the body of a baby, I'm holding the body of a man, and his life.
So profound.
It was, well, partly because I'm kind of visual and
Yeah.
poetic view of life. So following the golden thread, holding on to that thread, some equipoise, and partly because everything that had happened previously in my life seemed to play into this. So it seemed like a journey I had been given. So I didn't want to question how I had been given it. It just felt like that. So I followed my deep instinctive feeling about this. Also, again, I didn't think that um, I didn't think that the system could provide the answers, and I thought there were other ways of understanding, and I was aware that somehow or another, step by step, I was traveling, like the next stepping stone was just put in front of me when I needed it. It wasn't that uh, heaven or whatever you like to call it didn't also provide some obstacle courses, uh, um, but I always seemed to be able to be given some way around it. Either something came to my head or something was given to me. And the extraordinary thing was when I did finally get into the university by the most very curious means.
That's what I was about to ask you, to explain to us, at what stage you realized you needed to bring this further and you needed to actually do research in it, your ideas. Because it has to be said, for all the support that you had around you, it wasn't without its negativity. There were people who questioned the fact that you were putting so much attention on Doran, and
Yeah.
that this child doesn't need you as much as Lily needs you, and yet you still knew that Lily was, Lily was your angel, your guardian angel, if you like, a type of metaphorical guardian angel there with you all the time, guiding you. But at all stages, you knew that Doran was worth fighting for, and that must have been hard when you were meeting with thinking particularly of Lily's godfather in the book. It must have been hard when you were being constantly questioned about your love for this child who you knew was there, but they couldn't see what you could see.
Yes, I think also, for the curious reason, I seem to be able to stand in other people's shoes and see the world from other people's eyes. So when somebody is saying something like that, instead of feeling hurt myself, I think, well, seen from his perspective, I understand why he thinks that.
Mm.
But that doesn't have to change my course. And there's only so much that I can say because I don't have this background. Um, Fairly recently, or maybe it was 3 years ago, I met somebody who was who bought one of Doran's paintings, and I'd known her a long time ago. She'd really she was a magistrate. She uh, I met her through some brief forays into local politics, and she had really felt that I had taken on more than I could chew, and obviously had talked to a lot of other people, expressed her opinion. And when she saw Doran having this huge gap because she'd been away and suddenly she comes back, and she sees these paintings and she sees Doran, and she felt so, I suppose, humbled by it. But it wasn't. It wasn't her fault.
I know it's we're
You
human
tried
beings.
to do what you thought was right, but I was on my course. I wasn't going to be deflected from my course because I have this balance. So I think that must have been it. Rather than let this come through to shape me, I thought, why do you think that? I understand why you think that. That's all right. Bless you. You mean well,
He was
but
only caring
don't
for
know what I know. And so here I go. And I suppose because she knew that in other ways, she said, this time, then it's going to come unstuck because there were a lot of things that I had done, and as you say, thrown the vision ahead and followed the vision, and all had been kind of well. Uh, um, so,
So
but it was
you went to college, and you embarked on the dreaded, and I've been through it. I've been and out the other side of a PhD, and you really nearly seriously need your head examined when you're embarking on a PhD.
I
But
don't.
you did, and you set out on it, in science.
So in the beginning, I was doing a program that we got from America, which was 12 hours a day, 365 days a year, except in the leap year you did the extra day. And, but I had many people to help me doing this. And it started so promisingly. But gradually, by the time Doran became 5, 6, there wasn't the foundation that had been suggested. And I could see, although he was growing, he wasn't building anymore on his development.
Yeah.
And again, I was reading a lot of
Can I just interrupt you? You were going to America regularly. You had
yeah,
they had raised your friends and people around you had raised funds many times for you to bring Doran to
yeah,
America to
yes.
this treatment.
Yeah.
But
So
there wasn't the facilities in England or anywhere else to do them on a shorter period of time.
no, no. And the other thing was, of course, that we were having to fundraise, but at that time, it was acceptable, the media, the newspapers, the television, that if somebody is doing something as extraordinary as this, because nobody in the UK had stepped out of line with their child. So we were allowed to be on breakfast television, various little documentary programs. Doran's development was being followed, and we were able to raise the money. You couldn't do that now
No,
because the media won't accept stories like that at all. You can only accept a mainstream view of things, which is, of course, rather depressing
very depressing.
and reinforces this and misses a huge lot of what is well evidenced science in the course of it, because they won't allow that to be presented.
Mm.
But just as I was beginning to wonder what on earth I could do next, because I felt they'd taken me so far, and now it wasn't leading, it wasn't going to lead where I knew I had to direct matters. And as I read these textbooks on physiology again and again and again, I came to the respiratory system and the diaphragm, which I had thought about, which I'd also thought about as a painter. And when I used to be teaching life drawing, I used to say, your model is never still. Your model is breathing. You have to, the drawing, you've got to breathe life into the drawing. This is the
Yeah.
drawing look as if it has this dynamic of life. So, and then I had no television. I was out in this little cottage, sort of saved from whatever else was going on around. Somebody lent me a television and said, look, there's a program, a Horizon program on the brain, remarkable man, Professor Patrick Wall, head of cerebral studies at University College London. I think you should listen to it. So I did. And I was so fascinated by all of this material on brain plasticity. I sent him a copy. Oh, I'd written a book at that time. That was the first book. So I sent him.
Bestseller.
It had been a bestseller, but it narrates all the high seas, the voyage. It's a bit of a cliffhanger from beginning to end, really.
That was
But
Doran, how a mother's love and a child's spirit made a a miracle by Linda Scotson.
so, so I sent him the book, and I explained as best I could that I thought that brain injury appeared to affect the respiratory system as well. And because I could see it in the breathing of the children, I'd met so many of them now, and I could see what we had done when I was using the therapy to help Doran's breathing had helped him. And then it didn't seem to help him any further, and I didn't know quite why the particular approach didn't, but I was still sure that this was underlying matters. And he wrote back and said, come and see me, come and see me. So he was absolutely lovely. And he would say to me, it's really interesting what you're saying. I don't think you mean it quite like that. Let me just shift your words. You mean it's a bit more like this. So instead of saying to me, absolutely, you're an idiot, these are all fanciful, he didn't. And I read, because Professor Ball sadly passed away. Well,
sorry,
at university, and in his obituary it said he didn't suffer fools gladly.
No, he didn't come across in the documentary on you. He didn't seem to suffer fools gladly.
Oh, that wasn't Professor Wall. That was another professor later on in my life who came in.
He didn't seem to suffer fools gladly either.
No, he didn't. He didn't. So this was very nice, and he was wonderful, because in his office he repositioned the chairs, so we weren't talking across a desk. And they had all these cages of rats, but I like rats. They're very good mothers. They're highly intelligent. So it didn't faze me.
I'd have been gone out of the room, Linda. Gone out of the room.
Well, they're very noble, because it was the experiment.
Linda, can I ask you to explain about the diaphragm, the importance of, as you saw it, of the diaphragm, particularly to a child or adult with cerebral palsy?
Okay. So he got me into the psychology department. There was no internet at that time, but I had the use of the science library. So I used to go down there and search for papers, look through the references until I found a reference that got a bit closer, keep going up to the photocopying machine, get something more, come home on the train with this pile of stuff. And gradually I began to see that there's an enormous muscle in your body that eventually has a dome-like shape. This is called the diaphragm. And your diaphragm is a highly intelligent organ, and it's a multifunctioning organ. It descends so that your lungs will expand. Many people who breathe this way doesn't allow the diaphragm to descend. The diaphragm's movement of descent causes the deoxygenated blood to return to the heart, including the deoxygenated blood from the brain back to the heart. So the amount of oxygenated blood that can get into the brain is determined by the amount of deoxygenated blood that is removed. Otherwise, you'd get swelling in the brain. But if this doesn't happen quickly enough, efficiently enough, because of your breathing, there will be areas where the blood will be stagnating. And stagnating meaning the oxygen has gone, the cells aren't actually dead, but there's nothing very much that they can do. And to grow a brain, what you need is the presence of oxygen and information. So the whole nervous system also needs this business of the oxygen being, because the diaphragm is attached to the lungs and the heart. So as it moves down, there's an element of stretch going on there. And this stretch, I read, is a trigger that switches on the genetic material in the lung cells so they can determine themselves. And it's also explains the strong relationship between breathing and heart rate, because if there isn't enough blood oxygen and sufficient circulatory of metabolic oxygen, the heart has to work harder. So, but of course, the diaphragm is also connected to all the organs below it in little sacs, and the tissue is called fascia, which reacts like fiber optics very quickly, quick movements, quick of information. So the whole of your body is gently under the influence of this respiratory pulse. Now, the acid-alkaline balance is very important in the body. So carbon dioxide is an acid, and oxygen is neutral to alkaline. So
But
you
are
become
we, sorry for interrupting. I'm thinking, as you're saying it here, as somebody who's not a scientist, that to me, it's starting to sound very much like, well, we are living organisms, but like trees and plants, and you know, plants react to acidic or alkaline soil, or and and carbon dioxide and carbon and oxygen, and the relationship between that. I'm not surprised that our bodies function according to alkaline and acids and
and
oxygen.
and there are lots of receptors. There are
Yeah,
receptors called chemoreceptors, which are chemical receptors, but it's that note the levels of carbon dioxide as acidity, right? And baroreceptors that are interested in the pressure. So the other thing that occurred to me very strongly was that the very terminology that is used in clinical medicine bars you from an understanding of it, because it stops even the medical students and the doctors from recognizing the connectedness of it all. You know, everything in your body is really uh, dependent upon the presence of a vibrant tissue oxygenation. Our bodies are mostly water. Water contains electromagnetic information fields. So intercellular fluid, extracellular fluid, blood, lymph, cerebral spinal fluid, just it's all fluid. And when in school, if you're told anything about the diaphragm at all, you might just see it as a little inconsequential membrane underneath your lungs. And if you look at a model of the trunk, it will be plaster of Paris, very hard, no fluid in there at all, nothing to connect the organs. If you happen to watch a surgery on the telly, it makes an incision, all this water spurts out, and you're trying to control the water. Water? You know, but the water isn't just there as padding. The water is extraordinarily important to provide the vital life that we have, and the instrument that moves this around through our bodies, creating these pressures, a whole variation of pressures, a whole vibrant dynamic, is the diaphragm. And when you look at so much talk about genes, well, as I said, genes depend on external events. And the final thing they depend upon is the presence of oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Oxygen is the main trigger for unlocking the genetic
material.
material.
Your theory or your thesis then was that without proper breathing techniques, without proper use of the and strengthening, if you like, of the diaphragm, that there is going to be no progression of the brain. Whereas if you can get the child to, if you can get the strength in the diaphragm from a very early age, and it'll help with the movements and help with the brain. I'm just trying to put it into a layman's term for people who are listening to this.
What your listeners will be saying at this stage: how on earth can you instruct an infant to breathe differently? Well, you don't. You don't instruct the baby to breathe differently. Something else is happening. So your respiratory system develops before birth. And in fact, a month into a pregnancy, what's called fetal breathing is happening. This thin membrane is moving. And this movement, which, as I pointed out, is very important.
It's 20 hours.
For creating the connectedness, the organ connectedness, the connectedness of different systems in the body by switching on cellular information and providing energetic oxygen. But if there is a drop in oxygen from for whatever reason, because of some damage to the brain for whatever reason, whether it's a blow, a toxicity, the positioning of the baby in utero. It really doesn't matter the reasons why this drop of oxygen should have occurred. There will be a compensatory redirection of blood supply away from the developing lungs and diaphragm to the brain to help the brain. Now, interestingly, this can happen, and to all intents and purposes, the brain has no obvious damage, but it might have been a little bit rearranged. Maybe the rearrangement was going to be to your advantage, because it will give you a certain bias in terms of your strengths and weaknesses. But it can, along the line, also create a weakness in your respiratory system. Your respiratory system will adapt, and this weakness may not be exposed until you are a lot older. And then stress in later life can begin to expose the problem. Your diaphragm creates the internal pressures that creates the body structure. When you come out of your mother, you're very compressed. You've been in a small space. You now have to decompress. And the decompression allows blood supply to reach the nerves in the joints of the body. So, and therefore signals from the joints to the brain. So this is very important in a child with cerebral palsy, for example, or autism, or whatever the abnormal condition of the child, from the point of view of development. And there are a myriad of different diagnoses that exist there, but fundamentally, the respiratory circulatory capacity has been insufficient to provide this internal opening, which is so important. So what I realized I had to do was to create light, gentle pressures that copied the internal pressures of fetal breathing, and also the pressures that the young infant would create for itself as it began to shift its weight from one side of its body to the other, lying on a surface or resisting the surface of the body of a parent or caregiver, whatever it was. And these movements, they're done by all infants, and they're done in a search for pleasure. It's very pleasurable. No one ever later on in life teaches a child to skip. Why does a child skip? Because the fluid in the body moves up and down. You get a little oxygen burst. It feels nice. You trip and skip. And so the baby remembers these nice feelings, and you couldn't suggest to a baby, come on now, no pain, no gain, you'll never grow up unless you do this. No, the baby's lying there finding pleasure in its own body. And also that pleasure is related.
Well, you've worked with thousands of children and families down through the years, but one particular child, we're going to just look at a little bit about him, is Hugo. And he was very young when he developed cerebral, or well, it was only a few months old when he was diagnosed. Pardon?
Yeah, Tanya had a really difficult birth with him. Hugo can now lie on his tummy and hold up his head, and he has some clear words of speech. Although he's clearly frustrated.
Go on then, turn back over. Can you roll back over? Yeah?
Hugo has begun to wriggle successfully across the floor.
That's it, Hugh. Look at you. He's off, he's off.
Yes.
He's off, he's off.
Nearly here.
That's it. Push with your hands.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant, Hugo. You're nearly here. Nearly at my feet.
Hugo can now crawl the length of the room. His crawling is much more coordinated. His arms and his legs are beginning to work together in a bit of a cross pattern. But he still can't hold up his head well enough. So there's still work to be done. However, he's beginning to enjoy movement. And this is very unusual for a child with cerebral palsy. So we see him thinking about how to edge himself forward and taking pleasure in it.
Really good, baby. Come on.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Well done.
That was the best ever.
Well done.
Best ever so far.
Push up. Push yourself up.
So,
Hello.
with a little help, Hugo can now rise from the floor into a seated position and maintain balance on all fours.
He's much stronger, isn't he? Oh, he's good now. He can get up now. You never used to be able to do that.
I can now.
You've been practicing. Look at you. Look at you. You're nearly up.
Oh, what a clever boy. Is this a first?
Yeah, it is.
It is a
We've been
first.
waiting ages.
He can now rise from the floor without help,
That's good.
move into a sitting position, and then go back onto all
Almost here.
fours.
Almost here.
I fell over because my arms were hurting. We always keep on trying.
Keep on trying.
This is really nice because he's doing it.
Yeah.
Clever boy, you've learned so much.
He can easily call the length of the room, and he's beginning to express himself well and with the mind of a 4-year-old.
Feel inside your body. It's suddenly that you can jump on a wall.
Yeah.
Almost done.
Almost there. Touch the edge of the mat here.
Back here somewhere, moving.
Touch your finger. Hey,
That was fantastic.
he's done it. Hey.
Okay.
Hello.
Years that you were working with him, and it's just astonishing, really, just absolutely astonishing that a child can go from not being able to move at all and having had a shockingly poor prognosis or diagnosis, if you like, and or prognosis, and he's at that stage after months.
And if you go to the website, advancedcenters.com, you'll see the video of Hugo. It goes on, the story goes on. He's crawling over obstacles now, and he crawls everywhere. The thing that happens to children, the child, is that this ratio of respiratory capacities to body weight and an energetic output gets less and less in favor of the child who has cerebral palsy. So what happens is what creates in the minds of clinicians that this is hopeless is that as the superficial muscle, as I mentioned, gets more and more powerful because the respiratory capacities can no longer support a developing system. They've stopped. So papers say, a seriously brain injured child would only be able to support development perhaps up to 3 years, a more moderately affected one about 4 or 5 years, and a child with more minor problems, they'd be about 7 years. And what their meaning is that at this point they will need support, artificial support, to be able to achieve anything if they are more able in the first place. But they are still saying that young people with cerebral palsy who have been able to walk in their early years may decline into a wheelchair because there is a inbuilt deterioration, functional deterioration, which is not explained. It's very obvious what it is. It's very and anybody who has any respiratory problem that other than cerebral palsy knows, and we know ourselves, when we are exhausted, then you can't think very well, you can't digest your food very well, you can't move very well. So it's quite clear that your respiratory capacities underlie your presentation of functional abilities on a day-to-day basis. So if you push a little bit and ask why this deterioration occurs, when you're told, of course, the brain injury itself is not it's not progressive. The brain injury isn't progressive, but the dynamics of development are exponential. So what has happened was, because this exponential dynamic development has been arrested, then the overall, the body's abilities are now crushed back. So the brain is not fed literally with the levels of oxygen that it needs, and it's not fed literally with the information that it needs. And there's a very particular, because as well as working directly on the diaphragm, I do look at the early movements of the baby related to pre-crawling movements and crawling and on the stomach and on all fours, and how the movements are very connected with the diaphragm. Your legs are connected to the hips, the psoas muscle connects to the hips and goes right up into the diaphragm. Your arms are connected to your rib cage, which is connected to the diaphragm. So as you're moving, the diaphragm being beautifully placed here is getting little compressions and decompressions, which are creating many pulses, which are providing that extra nutrition needed for movement, and the intelligence of your breathing will fall in to a pattern to support those rhythmic metabolic demands, needs. Unfortunately, there's no money in it. You can't do this with a drug. It's not possible. You have to do it with your hands and with your ability to encourage and understand to create the changes that you need. Nor is it a fast process, but it is a steady process. So you quickly see that the development, which was predicted to go in that way, say for Hugo, is now ongoing in the opposite direction. And now the number of things that he is doing, driving his own development. And those changes were brought about with relatively little work overall. Hugo came to me three times, but he does still come 3 days a week. His mother does a little bit, but it's not easy for her, which is why I asked her to come to me. But then, and you can see similar changes taking place in other households with children who are whose parents have learned the same approach and understand it, because when you understand it, the panic goes away. The difficulty for parents is they're in a panic because they've been told there's a small window. If you don't do anything within this window, then there's no hope. But that's an artificial window, because we can recreate the circumstances.
Well, Linda, we could, I'm just conscious of, I suppose that to try and get as much in as possible for people to know about you, and I'll have your information posted up on this interview, so that people who want to contact you about this therapy can. But I'd like to show kind of, I mean, the little boy that you were told would never walk, talk, possibly see, and certainly would be profoundly deaf. This is Doran today with his artwork, and maybe you'll explain that, Linda.
So Doran has always had a rather poetic disposition, so his paintings are kind of ongoing poems, and the stories go through them. And here is he with his old music teacher, who's a great friend, admiring his work. The lovely thing about Doran is that he is now 45, and far from deteriorating, he's actually getting better at doing things, better at his ability to manipulate paint is increasingly skilled. His ability to well, dig the garden, for example, which takes quite a lot of balance and postural ability. And he's enjoying the things about the house that he does domestically, spontaneously, to assist. He feels his body just flows in and will perform the act.
And here you are doing some of the exercises with Doran.
That I have to explain also that they're very tiny movements, because we are getting inside the body. The movements of blood fluid within the body, the movements of the internal processes within the body are obviously very tiny, but they're very precise. If they were not very tiny, we'd be extremely disconcerted to feel everything. So my intention was to find my way inside, to find an internal language. And the lovely thing is that I can teach this over Skype or Zoom. I can teach anybody anywhere in the world, which is great. People can come to my center, but they don't necessarily have to. And this is Doran, I think probably about 2.5 himself.
And that's him today. After doing he does many mini marathons, and you use that chamber quite a bit for generating oxygen.
Well, we have hyperbaric chambers as well, which Doran used quite a bit early on, but he only uses it now as a support for his athletic prowess.
And I mean, it's amazing, Linda, to see the progress of Doran. I mean, I'm just going to press this again and just show this is absolutely astonishing, that the little boy that you were given such little hope for as an infant, as a newborn baby, is running mini marathons now.
But it was a half marathon, and curiously enough, he's run 6 half marathons, I think, so far, and some 10Ks. But this was the first one I put him in, and I thought it was all going to be on the flat along a meandering river, because that's the bit that I'd seen. When I got there with the family to drop him off, and the people said, "Oh, this is one of the toughest half marathons in the country," right up and down the South Downs. So we were following the race as best we could in the car, and stopping and watching them. And so he was coming down these really steep paths with all the pebbles sliding away. I was waiting to see him collapse at the bottom. He had a slightly asymmetric movement to him at that time, which he doesn't really have now. So I could see this little white dot that was moving slightly asymmetrically, and think, oh my goodness, when am I going to see it in a little pile at the bottom? I couldn't do anything. I couldn't stop him. And then amazingly, he did so well. And as you can see, he was inspired on the last, because the soldiers were they got this enormous backpack. So he just wanted to do that much better.
But in a way, it redefines the word disability, because those of us who would not be considered disabled or would be considered able-bodied, I couldn't do that in a million years. Let alone do it with a condition, say, such as cerebral palsy. So you wonder what, should that word be removed from our lexicon, disabled? Is it something within our minds more than our bodies that prevent us from doing things?
I think that you're quite right. It's that there is a problem with the word, because you find what is enabling you within that, and new possibilities begin to arise within you, and you begin to re-evaluate what you are, what you have been given, where the potential lies. And sometimes you have to have a degree of conflict and struggle to rise to that point. If everything is too easy, we don't really grow.
No.
It's a really difficult dilemma, isn't it? Because I would all the time think, oh, I don't really think I need another lesson now. I don't really want to be tested. Oh, yes, you do. Here it
Well,
comes.
I spent my whole life as a dancer. And I think, and I mean, like you, my primary degree was in art and design, so I understand the creative and this determination to be better, to do things to do things with your body or yourself that other people will tell you is impossible. And I think probably when people were challenging your ability to help Doran in any way, I think that is probably your creative spirit and the creativity within you that said, as well as the mother's love and intuition, that said, no, I'm going to do this one way or the other. So it became mind over body, really. And I just think we're such complex organisms that it's not until we actually set our minds on doing something that we realize how much we're actually capable of.
All
Do
the
you
time.
know? And
All
I look at dancers and you think, anyone in the arts, and you take critique after critique after critique, and you think, I'm never going to get it, but just by keeping going and wanting to keep going and wanting to almost like you're fighting yourself, and you're challenge you're competing against yourself, the weaker part of you, to actually progress.
And the important thing is, what is so tricky with the approach, that the conventional approach to a movement problem, is that the tendency is to tidy you up, to put you in braces and spinal jackets and chairs with support. And so your body, what creates the vitality in your body is the movement of blood flow through your body. It's an energy field in itself. It carries oxygen, and it carries magnetic charge. It's your energy field. Now you are cramping the energy field, so
Exactly.
you get a feel mentally and physically. So you get a feeling of what is called learned helplessness. You get neglect of your body. You don't find a particular joy in your body, and similarly to your digestive system, because it becomes more difficult for you to chew and swallow and digest. You tend to be fed foods which give easy pleasure but are highly processed, which are really disturbing your whole digestive system. And therefore you get an element of brain fog that you don't even know you have, because that's all you know. And so gradually you withdraw from acknowledging this vital energy, which is still yours within you. It can still all be exposed, and you can still run with it. It doesn't really matter your age. With Doran, I watched this decline from I suppose the age of 6 through. I was finding so many different ways, adapting, that I could reach his breathing, but none of them were really successful. I could sort of keep him balanced, but I couldn't drive him forwards. And he was 26 by the time I was able to, I mean, this is sort of 20 years ago, probably 24, let's say, because I was experimenting with this on myself, on Lily, on anybody else who would volunteer, and of course on Doran. And then suddenly there was this huge turnaround within him. And again, every day was driving forwards. And of course, if your body is more refreshed every day, the world around you looks different.
Yes.
When you're ill, even if you just have a cold, it seems an enormous effort. You think, oh, what are these people doing running around?
But you know, Linda, the way I look on it, again, coming to it from a completely non-scientific, I did biology in school, and I loved science subjects, but you know, you're thinking when somebody is restricted in movement, and as a dancer, maybe this is my way of thinking. If somebody is restricted in movement and you compound that restriction by putting them into whatever calipers or a cage system or whatever, then you're shutting down what allows their brain to actually move, to instinctively want to move. And as human beings, we do instinctively need to move from the moment we come into the
Right.
into the earth. The baby automatically starts to unfold, and if you see babies and they're covered up in these, swaddling, they're swaddled by parents, and they wake up in the morning, you take the blanket, the swaddling off them, and they immediately, naturally, instinctively start to stretch. But I would imagine that once you constrict that, you're reversing the progress of the brain to actually stretch. And I was interested in maybe you can explain what you mean by the crossover. Do you know where you're trying to get the right side of the brain to tell the right side of the body to cross this way, and then when the child is crawling, like for instance, with the way he's crossing his body to crawl, the way babies do, but cerebral palsy babies don't know how to actually cross the arms, and how beneficial that crossing of the body, the left and right side of the brain being moved at the same time is.
So this is helping the connection between the two hemispheres. Okay, that's called their nerve fibers across, called the corpus callosum, which is the body's bridge across. So, but at the same time, when you consider this movement across, your diaphragm is in the middle. So you just slightly twist, and you slightly twist it the other way. And all that little twisty movement is compressing and decompressing, pushing the blood around, creating pulses, keeping the health of this organ maximized. And so if you don't move like that, if you're only moving from side to side, it doesn't do the same thing. But this is your central generator. It's this big driver. And another thing,
it's your trunk.
It's the diaphragm within the trunk there. And your diaphragm is your main postural muscle, and its movement helps to strengthen the ring of muscles which they also use for posture around it. If the diaphragm is weak, those muscles don't develop, and what happens also is that the external muscles again get stronger to hold you in some kind of position. So gravity is a problem. Children have to resist the gravitational force. The blood has to resist it. So you have to build the little sphincter muscles that are going to push the blood down to your toes, and the valves that push it back up to your heart. If you are put in a standing frame, the blood again is going to go down to your toes, but it will stagnate down there. There is no movement. You know, if you're in a long haul flight, you're told you've got to move around or you'll get deep vein thrombosis. but it seems quite okay to put a child for a long time in a frame. So what happens is the lower part of the body, because of the constrictions of segators and the long time in which you are not actively moving, and your breath is certainly not being encouraged to develop, because that needs movement, as we've been saying. So it may be fun to be able to stand up and use your arms with what limited ability you have on whatever is in front of you, along with the other children. But in the long term, it's detrimental. And in the long term, everything that is done at the moment for the children, or nearly everything, from a conventional point of view, leads you to the eventual outcome that the prognosis suggested in the first place, because they're treating symptoms, or they're trying to make the best artificially. If you go underneath that and find out what is actually going on with human development, what creates this miracle, then you come out with a very different solution to the problem. And I tried so hard to shift these ideas into the national health, but with no success whatsoever, really. It's quite curious, because everything in my thesis is well evidenced.
Yeah.
I've got
Yeah.
another book which has all the references in, and heavens, there are far more references now that I've come across and added to, because I'm learning all the time. But
it makes sense, Linda, from a purely simple perspective, that nothing in our body works independently, that every single thing that we do is connected either to our brain, to our muscles, to our heart, to our lungs, to our kidneys, to every single part of our body. Nothing can work without the other, without the help of the other. And that's the ingenious thing about us as living organisms, in a sense, is that even by the word organic or organism, we are developing, we develop as part of one structure. And that one structure feeds everything, whether it's the movement or the brain or the
Mary, it's so curious, because there are such words as ecology and Gaia, and these words which have been in our vocabulary for a long time, but it isn't practiced. And so-called holistic medicine is you sit in the middle of a hub and you go into this door and come out and that door, but the people don't come out together and discuss and evaluate together what lies beneath. No. And it's so tragic that the whole of our educational system is a divisive one. And really, that's why for you and I, because we've been on both sides, but in our hearts, there is no two sides.
No. And you know, I was looking, I know I'm going, just showing that there again now, when I'm looking back on Doran's paintings. And you know, that gentleman who was his music teacher remarked on something that was profound, which I noticed, was the presence in all of his paintings of the sun.
Yes.
In many of his paintings, and for me, that suggested that you know, it was almost a metaphor for his and for your life, that you saw the bright side of everything. That they were neither he or you were trudged down by the I suppose the system, or the negativity that was aimed towards him, but that he saw a bright future from Doran. Do you know? And I'm going to take that out there. So that really was what. But also, I mean, I suppose his paintings, I said it to you, they reminded me of an artist during World War II. She was a gypsy, Romany gypsy, and she was an amazing, Chava Stoica was her name. and she painted all her paintings almost like a child, even in her 70s, as a form of therapy, because that's the way she saw the world as a child. And you know, and the color that was used in it, it showed a vibrancy to Doran's brain, a hope to Doran's brain, and a belief that everything was wonderful, and that's a reflection of the life you gave him.
It is for him.
It is. It truly is, because you know, they say in art therapy, you can tell children's lives or the trauma by their paintings. And you look at Doran's paintings, and again, I'm going to go back. You know, they're just so vibrant, so full of life, so full of sunshine, so full of innocence.
And he learned also to use things that were perhaps uncomfortable, like his tinnitus. So he saw that as water, as waves on the sea, as rivers flowing, as waterfalls cascading, or he saw it as people singing or crying out. So when he began to listen to his tinnitus gave him inspiration for his pictorial work. So it ceased then to be a nuisance to him, but it became part of the work itself.
It's amazing. It's truly, so where from here now? You have your clinic in Surrey, in the UK,
East Sussex.
Sussex.
Well, actually, it's West Sussex, just over the border.
And it's the Linda Scotson, or the Scotson Centre.
So you would look up advancedcenters.com, and you'll find there, you know, the pictures, the videos, parent stories. You can come and visit the center. You can book online for a consultation, and if you want to work with me online, that's absolutely possible. It works well. Or you can come to the center, or you can do some of both. So there's and you can the therapy is learned in some depth in terms of the technical approach, and then it changes to relate to each individual child. So the parents need to have the skills, and then we look at the child itself as an individual, and therefore, though it may seem to a parent, oh, how on earth will I manage to do this on my child? There is always a way. There's always a way. And say autistic children, who are often on the ceiling and running about, they find it very calming, and it can be done while the child is asleep. So, and if the child is a disturbed sleeper, then you would simply lay your hands there for a while to get the child used to it. But after a while, it's so pleasurable, it's so calming, it's so nice, it's very acceptable at every level. And this is a surprise to a lot of children who have had many therapies that have been very uncomfortable. But as I pointed out, human development is driven for a search for pleasure. It has to be pleasurable.
Do you know, Linda, it's just, I think, well, as I said earlier in the interview, you know, it takes a village. They do say that it takes a village, and you've been part of a great village of people in your life who helped you along the way. Great friends, great parents, phenomenal daughter, Lily. It was an emotional journey reading your story. I did my PhD on childhood under Nazism. I thought I was you know, there's times when you think you can't go any further with research like that because it's so emotionally and horrifically draining. But I thought I'll be able to look at your documentaries and read your book, and there'll be nothing. I couldn't believe how profoundly touched I was by the book, by you as a human being. John Wood told me about you. A friend of mine, John Wood, his father was his father was the first officer into Bergen-Belsen during World War II and took over the humanitarian work. And I interviewed John some time back, and he's the stepson of Ken Wood of Ken Wood Chef organization or foundation. And John told me all about you, and he said you have to interview Linda. She's an extraordinary person, and it's an understatement. I'm touched and I'm impacted greatly by having got to know you and your story, and the love between you and your two children. And I really deeply thank you for being my guest on this show today.
Oh, Mary, thank you. It's a privilege and a delight to know you too. It's wonderful.
I feel I have a friend now.
We are.
You know, kindred spirits. Kindred spirits. But Linda, if anyone wants to contact you, they can contact you through the Advance Center. And
Yes.
I'll put all the information up here on the post and share it. Thank you very much, bro. I know you're of Irish descent on your mother's side.
Sure I am. Yes.
Sure you are. So from all here in Ireland, thank you so much, Linda, for being my guest on on my story.
Blessings and thank you all.
Slán. Bye bye. Bye bye.